This episode of Bullet Heaven was made with a copy of the game provided by Pixel Heart EU, and using the incredible Dreamcast Pack-a-Punch RGB cable from retrogamingcables.co.uk. Get yours using the link below. Astroport is a name that longtime viewers are probably pretty familiar with. We've taken a look at a good number of Astroport's games in the past, all the way up through Series 10, and for the most part, we've really dug the efforts of the small Dojin outfit. But more specifically, in episode 128 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Armed 7, a side-scrolling shmup that laid the groundwork for Astroport's later gigantic army. It was simple, but fun. 10 years after its original PC release, Armed 7 is back, this time retitled Armed 7. As in the number, not the word this time. Ported to the Sega Dreamcast by JoshProd and published and distributed by pixelheart.eu. JoshProd has a bit of a rocky history with their Dreamcast ports. For example, Captain Tomaday, while fun, was plagued with intense screen tearing, and Battle Crust just looked dreadful compared to its PC counterpart, no matter how we tried to scale the image. So, how does Armed 7 fare? Let's take a closer look. To get started, players form an arsenal of various primary, secondary, and special weapons. A selection of rifles, lasers, shotguns, and machine guns are available for players to adequately and comfortably deal a ton of damage to their opposition in an efficient manner. It allows for a few different playstyles, which should appeal to a wider group of players as well. Movement is of the basic 8-way variety, and the player's speed is fairly well balanced, allowing players to get around the screen at a good rate. Players have an armor stock that takes place of traditional lives with only a tiny hitbox that shows up when bullets get crowded. This, of course, makes it fairly easy to get through fairly dense bullet swarms. The player's movement does more than just move the player around. Moving your mecha up or down also changes the angle of the main gun. The player's gun will lift when ascending or drop when descending. But settings exist for the opposite to happen as well. This allows for a more defensive style of play, which we employ in games like G-Rev's Under Defeat. The player's gun will also lock in the direction in which it began firing. Armed 7 also employs a power-up system for players to upgrade their shots through a couple of levels. There are also additional shield pickups that allow players to get away with getting hit with a stray shot every now and again without dipping into the main armor stock, which itself can also be extended through score. At maximum, both the firepower and shields factor into scoring, which we'll take a look at shortly. Upgrades of both types are dropped from carrier ships in either red or blue for firepower and shields respectively. There are times that a much more robust attack may be required to either kill or severely damage larger enemies in a hurry. While the A button handles the player's main and sub shots, the B button will activate a super strong attack that refills after a certain amount of time, indicated by a gauge in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. These super weapons are selected with the player's loadout at the beginning of the game. Some are more powerful than others and may require more or less time to refill, but it adds to the overall strategy behind anyone's potential playstyle. There's not really a ton to knock the game with in terms of its gameplay, which is refreshing for once. The controls are just a touch slippery, but it's nothing that will stand in the way of a fairly easy 1cc. That said, if a player does end up biting it, they will not be able to continue, even though the screen says continue at game over, which I guess is actually to say that the player can continue back to the title screen or something. At any rate, there's a good amount of content for players to chew through in Armed 7 with its 7 decently long stages. In general, the game feels very responsive and it's pretty fun to play, even if it's visually rough around the edges, which we'll talk about soon. But best of all, there's a pause function this time around that lets players take a break if they need it. Multiple difficulty levels and a good overall challenge on the harder ones await the player as well. In the end, Armed 7's solid gameplay stays in a pretty safe zone and it's pretty fun the whole time. It even has a scoring system that mixes in a few ideas from various classic shooters. Obviously, destroying a bunch of enemies is going to give the player a decent amount of points, there's no disputing that, but, like the Raiden series, scoring high in Armed 7 is more or less based on how fast certain enemies can be killed off. The faster, the better. If a player can dispatch the larger enemies they encounter, a multiplier is applied. This also factors into sub-bosses and stage end bosses as well. Destroy the boss fast enough and a huge score will result. But there's more. Additional scoring is achieved by maintaining a maximum power level in both your weaponry and shields, as pickups for each beyond max will yield a large amount of pointage. As always, the more the better, but there's also a twist. The scoring beyond max power is greater for higher difficulties. Collecting on a max power bonus on easy will be much less than doing it on hard. But this brings us to something we missed the last time around. There's also a secondary maximum score with regards to shields, similar to the bomb max score mechanic in Dodanpachi. If shields are collected past the 2-slot shield max, a bar will appear that reads maximum, and the score will shoot up on its own. So long as maximum reads in the shield slot, the player's score will increase. As such, staying as unscathed as possible will yield the best scores. There is one final note with regards to the shield maximum bonus though. The score will stop increasing during boss encounters. At the end of the stage, a bonus for the speed of boss destruction and the amount of shields in reserve is applied. Obviously, maintaining the shield count and killing off the bosses quickly will result in the best bonuses. Bearing all of these points in mind, players should easily be able to obtain the many extends that are possible in ARMS 7 to achieve a fairly easy 1cc on normal. The player score can also be saved to a VMU for players to compare future runs to their previous bests. The Dreamcast version of ARMS 7 takes a pretty interesting approach to its presentation. While the Steam version we took a look at in episode 128 was just a straight conversion of the PC Dojin original, JoshProd also palette swapped the game into an all-new original version that features trippy colors and new music. And this may or may not sit well with fans of the original. At its core, ARMS 7 does some great things with its mechanical and aircraft design. Not only is everything well animated and presented, it also looks pretty good on the whole. Explosions are satisfying and the backdrops are pretty sweet too, complete with a ton of parallax and destructible elements. The JoshProd rendition uses some weird colors compared to the PC original though, which veterans of the original are sure to scratch their heads at, but it does work in the same way the color swaps in Mario World did back in 1990. After all, the sprites are still the same, just a different color. But there are issues here as well. The backgrounds and stage elements don't mesh especially well with buggered up static and animated background tiles in a lot of places. There are also a lot of masking artifacts as well, surrounding a lot of the sprites with a colored outline. The game in general also looks very smudgy, even over VGA. To put it simply, the PC version looks much better despite running at the same resolution. ARMS 7 displays over VGA or with a specialized SCART cable at 480p, which can be upscaled to 960p using an OSSE, as you can see here. More so than the visuals though, the sound is entirely different. We didn't exactly care for the new music in the JoshProd flavored ARMS 7 at first, but it does actually work adequately for the action on screen. It's just not a very Astro-porty sounding version is all. The old soundtrack, while a bit cheap sounding, still feels like a better fit for the game. Obviously, this change is sure to freshen up the game for returning players that agree with the new style. A couple of sound effects can still grate on your ears every now and again, like the special weapon charge indication, but otherwise, all of the weapons and explosions are not really that bad at all. However, the sound in general does feel really drowned out by the bass, or so it seems. The PC versions just sound a lot cleaner. ARMS 7 has a solid UI in both JoshProd and original mode, and a clean, simple menu rounds out the presentation along with a number of unlockable in-game emblems, which is always a nice bonus. The UI is a bit different in the JoshProd version, which takes a bit of getting used to but still works fairly well. Perhaps best of all is that both the JoshProd version and the original style are both selectable when the game is booted up. This is perfect for players like us that prefer the original but still accommodates others that like the new style. So, how does it stack up? Let's take a look. For the most part, ARMS 7 controls very well on the Dreamcast controller. There's also even a pause function this time around. ARMS 7 is only moderately challenging without upping the difficulty to hard, but this is good for new players to the genre. This is in stark contrast to games like Ikaruga or Border Down. At 7 stages, ARMS 7 lasts a good amount of time on its own, but with 2 different versions, unlockable emblems, and saved high scores, its length is nicely enhanced. Visually, the Dreamcast version of ARM7 doesn't look as good as it could have. The PC version is still better to look at since the sprites stay together properly and the JoshProd Redux has bizarre color palettes. Unfortunately, the Dreamcast version of ARM7 suffers with its sound as well. The new tracks aren't necessarily better nor worse than the originals, but the balance feels off, with maybe too much bass. Some of the sound effects can also get really tiresome. On the whole, ARM7 on the Dreamcast does the job it sets out to accomplish, bringing a doujin PC title to a very capable classic console. It's a pure novelty, of course. ARM7 on PC is definitely the better version, but the Dreamcast version still works well. The mechanics behind the game are strong enough. Weighing in at just under €35, ARM7 can be had in various flavors to match the region a player's games might be from. North American, Japanese, and Europal versions of the packaging and discs are still available. But no matter the version, they're all region-free, a must-have for Dreamcast shooting game completionists like us. It's moderately costly, but probably worth it. In the end, ARM7 is a title that makes a great addition to the somehow still growing Dreamcast library. It's clear that this game was ported better than any other JoshProd title so far, and we hope new games will make the jump in the future. ARM7 on the Dreamcast gets a 4 out of 5. You can grab a copy of ARM7 on the Dreamcast on the pixelheart.eu website for about €35. Pixelheart has also sent along other games we're going to check out in the future, including multiple versions of a game we'll be making a special feature of. Until then though, get ready to check out a new PC shooter. See you all in the next episode. Aw, yeah.